All right, we are back with the lightning round session. We're going to try to wrap up our discussion questions for week 2, and that may or may not happen in 15 minutes, right? So, wasting time. Get on it. Let's engage John for a little bit. John, love your approach here is drawing some questions that resonate with our screening, with one of our screenings for the week. He's looking at newscasts of the 1970s. John has a question. What caused the change from the main news anchor standing to sitting as they do in today's news program? I don't have definitive reason. I didn't research this really well, but some anchors still stand, right? Wolf Blitzer's never sitting down on CNN. Occasionally, about half the time you see who's it, Anderson Cooper standing up, and then Don Lemon, he's sitting down. It's whatever. I mean, I'm not sure, but some anchors had to hang around all day. Okay, so maybe it's just personal preference. There is something interesting. Seth Meyers. Seth Meyers was a head writer on SNL, Saturday Night Live, for years, and he had such a rhythm and a style, not only a writing style as a writer, but if you're the head writer on SNL, you're usually your function is to be the weekend update co-anchor, the sort of mid-show news segment. And so he was really excellent at that. And it was the only thing he was ever involved in from the in front of camera sketch standpoint. And so when he transitioned to his own late night show to follow Jimmy Fallon, he had the everyone does it standing in front of the audience monologue to open the show. And they were never really satisfied for not only how the jokes were going off, but how he felt, the level of comfort he felt, Myers. And so they shifted maybe a year or two into doing the gig to a behind the desk opening. He starts out behind the desk, and then he does his opening monologue from behind the desk. And he regained a level of comfort and confidence, and has received even a lot of recent praise for some of his biting commentary or whatever. But there's an instance of sometimes it's just the preference and style of the anchor and the producers. Like, what are you going for? What do you want out of this? Sometimes someone needs to sit still. I teach a lot of public speaking classes, and one of the things that we can quickly critique is people that pace around and move around a lot, And do you want a bunch of penguins up there as your news anchors, or do they need to instill confidence, project confidence by staying still? That's a great phenomenological project. Many of you can just start watching anchors' body language instead of actually watching or listening to them. In the 70s, at least in this segment, the reporters sat at their desks while relaying the news. In today's news, reporters are out on the scene. Why has this changed? Depends. How many episodes of the news did you sample, right? So is that an accurate reflection that happened in one episode, or was this, do you recall specifically from years of sort of close watching the news texts, were the reporters always indoors for a while? Perhaps, but my response to the text we watch, perhaps there wasn't enough action in the action news. Maybe that was it, right? Maybe Ron Burgundy has a response for us. How important, looking at Mattel's complex TV, how important is narrative in television shows? It's almost everything. It's almost everything today. All the world's a stage. Okay, so narrative drives everything, and without story, you cannot create content. But not as important to some producers as selling to distributors, right? Ka-ching, ka-ching. Let's look at Television American Culture, Mattel 2010. On page 128, it mentioned that television emerged in the 1940s. From that time, the news has transformed in many ways. So compared to only listening to news radio, does actually seeing the person who speaks on television cast a whole new outlook on how we perceive news? Of course. Many claim we occupy a visual culture. We're very visually driven. once we unlocked the visuals, this was a Pandora's box of sensory experience. Okay, think about even Facebook, the evolution of the news feed, the evolution of toward visual content, away from the written wall, and so on. That in of itself is monumental and reflects cultural preference. Okay, it reflects consumer interest, which is steeped in the visual. Video killed the radio star, right? As they say. Except for Alex Jones. He's still alive. Or is he? We watched the screening, one of the screenings for this week, and I hope you all are able to make time and are finding time for these episodes. They're, I mean, so well produced, but the 60s and the 70s, right? TV documentaries about television. John brings up an important question. This show provides us with a journey of the extents television progressed in the 70s. Are we experiencing the results of that progress, or more progress in that direction? I'm not sure. As we look back on the racial slurs, other issues mentioned in the 70s television shows, right? So maybe examples like the All in the Family clips that were showed on that, and a couple of others. Was it a good thing or a bad thing that shows dealt with these issues instead of being silent, right? Silence is prudent. It's arguably it was a good thing, because here's the lesson we learn: is silence produces no change in society most of the time. This is one reason. Don't stop watching this video. But you know, this is one reason many claim, right? Many critics claim that NFL players, or cultural critics, right, started kneeling at their own risk, at the risk of their league, right, at the risk of the profitability and the audiences and the attendees and all that, is because they needed to take an action, because being silent on an issue wasn't helping their cause. And all the rest, right, is like, we can leave it at the floor and debate it later. There is, you know, we can make that tie there. In terms of the All in the Family clip, speaking of racial issues, how is it that Archie Bunker was able to speak in the tone he did about a different race, while others would be persecuted for it? So there's a bit of a question about cultural context of the times and All in the Family's, you know, ability to stay on the air despite some controversy. One, first and foremost, the ultimate out for a television program of its sort, because audiences found it hilarious. Right? It's a sitcom, so its purpose is comedy. If people find it funny, if people are tuning in for and laughing, then it's succeeding in its number one goal. And so it's protected in that way. Second, arguably, there is a certain large segment of the populace probably feel like you know, this main character is expressing their same sorts of general outlook. All right, and so for its day, it would be very socially acceptable, even though it was simultaneously taboo to a certain extent, because TV previous to that had been quite sanitized in its framing of American values and so on. So there was interesting tensions there. All right, so in terms of M.A.S.H, would this show be more or less acceptable in the 60s due to its pertaining to war, issues, and content? So if M.A.S.H aired 1971, 72 to 83, would M.A.S.H have worked in the 60s instead, with its issues concerning war and so on? A show like this could have worked, but it didn't for a reason, and it did work when it did for a reason. And you can argue, you know, M.A.S.H needed something to react to and reflect upon, And America, like general American audiences, arguably weren't ready to receive it in that form in the 60s, right? And probably for many, many people, not enough information assessing the specifically the Vietnam War, even though the show is technically about the Korean War. Not enough information had been released or shared uh, about the details of war to sway the public in such a way that they would be open to this text's take on many things. And then, of course, censorship shifts were taking place. As the PDF refers to some of its occasionally mildly graphic surgery scenes, right? Which are, and I know many of you checked out Grey's Anatomy, right? I mean, essentially, you may not even notice a spat of blood by comparison to the shock tendencies of a given episode of Grey's Anatomy. What did this show contain that made it so popular even the years later? All right, so we've got this essay that makes a clear case for why M.A.S.H. had this success and the cultural impact it did have. But it also gave catharsis. Here's what I would suggest. It gave catharsis, and this is to kind of add to what Sepinwall and Seitz already say. It gave catharsis to the dehumanization of Vietnam. All right, so America is finally ready to reflect on the active nature of being involved in long-term war campaigns, while simultaneously sanitizing war, because it's, censored TV, and respectful enough in terms of being more lighthearted, right? More of a slash show that was mostly comedy, but then could infuse drama. Staying sanitized and respectful enough to appease the generation that survived World War II, that was involved there. Arguably, right? Arguably, it could appease to multiple generations with diverse experiences and perceptions of war and America's role in World War. All right, great questions there. You know what? We got one more bonus round coming up. Questions from Aaron. Stick tight. We'll be right back.